Good evening, everybody, and welcome. We're going to start our meeting off tonight with a very special spotlight. We are going to honor our retirees. We just came from a session downstairs where we do one of the very special things that I enjoy most being a part of the school board. When our people retire, they give a book to our media centers. And our retirees, we just went through that little ceremony and honored our retirees, looked at their books, and we are richer every single day for having these people with us. But for the number of years represented here, and I tried to count it up, but my calculator just ran out of space. A wonderful group of people, a very special group of people, and we'll give them their certificates as part of our spotlight tonight.
Good evening, I'm Tammy Reynolds, the Director of Special Services for the district. To our retirees, as I call your name, please come and join us. Bruce will give you a certificate, and when we're done, please stay up here for a photo opportunity. We are going to start with Sharon Ani, who has most recently been teaching at Aquila Special Education, and she has served our district for 35 years. Barbara Davinsky is retiring from the high school where she taught science for over 25 years. She's not here tonight. Meredith Homans, most recently serving at the middle school in grade 6, has served our district for 21 years. Mary Kingston, who's worked in our early childhood department at Central in our district for 10 years, serving St. Louis Park students for more than that. Sarah Korezowick, who could not be here tonight, served as our volunteer coordinator most recently. She served our district for 32+ years. Lynn Rayner, who also couldn't be here tonight, was most recently at the middle school, serving in the area of art, and she served in our district for 22+ years. Susan Peterson, not here tonight, most recently at Central as an ECFE teacher for 13+ years. And Jeff Zaslow, who is here tonight, most recently at our middle school, serving in grade 6 for 25 years. Mary Schultz, who most recently served in our Human Resources Department, has worked in our district for over 22 years. Could not be here tonight. Marla Sorensen from Central, serving as a community educator for 31 years. Could not be here tonight. Debbie Strand from Peter Hobart, grade 2 teacher for 26 years, is here tonight. And Sue Thomas from our Human Resources Department, serving the district for 22+ years, also could not be here tonight. But thank you to all of you. What a wonderful group, and for all that you've given us. Thank you.
We do have one more retiree, and because it's our superintendent, I wanted to say a couple of words on camera tonight. So, Deborah Bowers, would you please come up? Someone more eloquent than I has just handed me a note that says 293 total years represented in our retirees. So. Dr. Bowers has been with us for 9 years, and on behalf of the board and the entire district, I want to thank her for her service. All of the people in this room tonight are part of the team, and she has been a wonderful part of the team. And just a couple of things I wanted to mention about her on camera that are vitally important to our district. When she first came here, we had a fund balance of $400,000. Today we have a fund balance of over $6 million. Grants from all kinds of places, small learning communities, the federal I-3 grant, Cargill, the Sparks Counseling Grant have totaled over $5 million in the last few years. Her connection with the community through Rotary, through the Twin West Chamber, through Park Nicollet Foundation has helped us with scholarships, with funding, and with passing referenda in our community with votes over 60%. Our high school was International Baccalaureate when she first came here. However, what she helped add was 4 of our elementary schools are now authorized PYP, the Primary Years Program, IB schools, and the middle school is now a candidate Middle Years Program school. So in the next few years, our district will be K-12 IB. Our commitment to equity within the district has been maintained through excellence in our graduations. And one of the top things that's happened recently has been the improvement in our black students' graduation to 79%. She has built an excellent staff, and we really appreciate that, many of whom are here tonight. And one in particular, though, I do want to point out, our principal from the high school, Mr. Rob Metz, will be our next superintendent, and the board is in the process now of working out negotiations on his contract, and we are very proud of that too. Promotion from within is a policy of this district, and we intend to continue that. She and her family have been a blessing to this community, and her daughters have lived in the community. Her relationship with the board has been great, and we appreciate that. We thank her for her 9 years of service to St. Louis Park and almost 40 years of service in Minnesota education. Thank you, Dr. Bauer.
Thank you.
Cindy, can we get you to come this way? Well,
See, I said,
we
what
wanna
a
come.
fine graduating class we have.
You want to come out from under our lights? Okay. All right. We're right there.
I need you to go back.
You want the short guys on the basketball or something.
Yeah. That's perfect. Okay, on 3. 1, 2, 3. And if I get everybody hold their certificate in front of them so everybody looks the same. Thank you.
Except for you, Bruce.
Yeah.
All right, on 3. 1, 2. Thank you, congratulations.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Congratulations.
We'll now proceed with our agenda, with our call to order and the approval of the agenda. The agenda tonight consists of study session topics, and that is the 2013 referendum discussion. The school report tonight is from Susan Lingard, and we look forward to that. The building goal setting, the accountability rules and changes discussion, policy development, second reading of policy 650, student fundraising, QComp at the high school discussion, and then we have some action items tonight, the approval of the review of the comments for deferred maintenance, building addition products, bond referenda preparation, and capital projects preparation. From the original agenda put out, there is a slight change. There is a change in that that the board does have copies of. So, Cindy, anything else I need to add on that particular one?
We just need a motion to amend the agenda, please.
Okay, and we'll do that as soon as we present it. Yep. Next item, under our action items, is the approval of the tentative contract, Director of Research and Assessment, the approval of second reading of Policy 650, and the approval of QComp plan change, and then finally, communications, transmissions, and adjournment. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Approved by Larry, second by Ken. Any discussion? Okay, and now we need an amendment to the agenda to amend the change on the action item for item 6 on our approval to conform to the wording that you have in front of you.
I'll move to amend it, or I'll move approval as amended.
Okay.
This language on the at our places.
All right, then we'll approve the agenda as amended with the language that is now included from what Cindy has given us. Okay, we need a second on the amendment.
Just to clarify, do you want to do it as 2 votes to amend the agenda, or just one motion on the agenda?
We'll do one motion on the amended agenda. Is that okay with the first 2?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, now we need a second for the amendment.
Second.
Okay, thank you. Second by Ken. Moved by Julie, second by Ken. Okay, now we have an amended agenda.
I think it's moved by Larry, seconded by Ken as amended.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, my parliamentary procedure is being corrected here, thank you. Moved by Larry, seconded by Ken, as amended. Okay, I got it. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. 7-0 vote. Yeah, we did. We got there. Okay, at this point, we'll start with the 2013 referendum discussion, and that's Sandy Salen.
And tonight, this is a continuation of the superintendent's recommendation to the board at the last board meeting. We are going to be asking for approval for a review and comment, which is going to be required for our bond referendums, or going for our deferred maintenance projects, as well as our building addition projects, as well as our capital projects levy, which is what we normally call the technology levy. And we are also going to be asking for an approval for going forth with the funding sources for the bond referendum for the building additions and the deferred maintenance, as well as the capital projects levy for the technology levy. But before we do that, we have Joel Sutter here from Ehlers, who's going to do a presentation on what these funding sources mean to the district and to the taxpayers.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. A pleasure to be here with you tonight and to be working with your district once again on some important financial matters. We have served as the district's financial advisors for quite a number of years. I don't know how long, since before I've been at Ehlers, and have worked with you on many projects. And what I want to talk about tonight is some very preliminary financial information on the technology referendum and the bond referendum. And none of this is carved in stone. The board has control over how we structure the bond repayments in particular, and I wanted to just introduce this to you tonight. And these numbers will be revised as we get closer to the referendum, and if the board prefers to structure the bonds, for example, in a different way, that is your choice. So I'm going to start by talking about the technology levy. Under state law, this levy is referred to as a capital projects levy or capital projects referendum. So you'll see that terminology on the ballot language when you get to that point. The existing levy was approved in 1999, and it was for 15 years. So it was effective for taxes payable in 2000 through 2014. At that time, there was no limit in the law on how many years a referendum like this could extend for. Now this is limited to no more than 10 years. And so this district hasn't had to have a vote on this since 1999. So Just a quick review for the board. There's 3 different kinds of referendums that districts can vote on to raise additional funds. One is a bond referendum, and you're probably all familiar with that. That's where you get voter approval to borrow money by issuing bonds to finance capital projects. There's an operating referendum. I'm sure you're all familiar with that as well. That's where you ask permission to increase your general fund revenue by a certain amount per pupil, and that can be used for general operating expenses. The third type that's less common and that you haven't voted on in 14 years is what's this capital projects levy. And it's kind of a cross between the two, because like an operating referendum, it brings in a stream of revenue every year. But like a bond referendum, the money has to be spent on capital projects. So your capital projects referendum, or actually at that time the statutes called it a down payment levy, and was dedicated to spending funds on technology. And so this one is a continuation of that. So state law since then has changed the name to the capital projects levy and has put a limit of no more than 10 years on these levies. So the district is proposing to increase the current levy from approximately $1.37 million, which is what we estimate it will raise for next year's levy, to $1.75 million annually for 10 years. So it would be effective with taxes payable in 2014 through 2023. So this would have 2 effects. It would cause a slight increase in your levy for next year, because the existing levy is in place for 1 more year. So it'll cause that to increase for next year. And the ballot question would actually revoke the last year of authority of that levy and replace it with a larger amount. So it would cause a slight increase for next year, and then it would extend it for 9 additional years beyond next year. And we have the tax impact estimates here. I hope you can see them there, and you board members have a copy of this packet as well. So for example, on a $200,000 home, and I don't think I can sort of highlight it. On a $200,000 home, the levy that you would revoke, the 1999 levy, would reduce taxes by $54 per year. The proposed new authority of $1,750,000 would increase taxes by $69 a year, for a net increase of $15 per year. And so you see the figures for other properties there.
Just to confirm that that tech levy is based on the market value of all the properties, right? I forget the operative language now, but it's so as property values rise, the amount of money to the district.
That's correct. And I should clarify a couple of things about that. Whereas an operating referendum, taxes are spread on referendum market value, so businesses pay, a $500,000 business pays the same taxes as a $500,000 home. This is spread on what's called tax capacity, which is your market value multiplied by certain percentages. And that's why you see differential tax impact for different types of property of the same value. But yes, you're correct. It is a tax rate that the voters would approve that's applied to the district's total tax capacity. So when you're, I'm trying to remember what this was in the first year, but the dollar amount in the first year, 700,000, right? And so as your tax capacity increases, the amount you're authorized to levy can also increase. But in recent years, as your tax capacity has decreased, the dollar amount it raises also decreases. And that's, I've had school boards argue with me that that's not fair. You should be able to just set a dollar amount, and yeah, that's great, but that's not what the law says. So that's the way it works under the law. So. So that's the impact of that, as again, a slight increase in taxes for 2014 and extending it for 9 more years. So the impact in this last column shows the impact in 2014. The full impact compared to what would happen if you didn't vote to approve this is what's shown in the middle column, the full $1,750,000. Any questions about that before I move on to the bond questions? Okay. Potential bond projects. There are 2 groups of projects which you're proposing to fund. $10 million for deferred maintenance projects and $5 million for school additions. The bond amount will also need to include financing costs. If you want to have that amount of money to spend on your projects, we'll need to add a little bit to it for financing costs. I'll show you that in a minute. There are many options for how bond payments could be structured, and it's ultimately the school board's decision how we structure the bond payments. That's a decision you should make before you go public with the tax impact, and we don't have to make that decision tonight because all you're doing is voting to authorize submittal of review and comment information to the Department of Education. But we will need to make those decisions. Our initial options that we have proposed are based on what we call a wraparound structure, where we coordinate payments on your new bonds with your existing bonds. And I'll show you how that works in a minute. This option is really intended to limit the initial tax impact of the bond issue, and it helps to keep the tax rate relatively constant over time. And I'll show you in a graph what that looks like. But the board could consider many other options for payment structure. We have the bonds being paid off over 9 years. You can legally go up to 30 years, or you could go shorter than that, or you could go with a different structure. So this is what we call a sources and uses schedule, which shows for either the $10 million option or the $15 million option, the financing costs associated with it. And there's really, if you look at the $15 million option, there are two categories of financing costs. There's what's called an allowance for discount bidding. That is an upfront interest charge paid to the underwriter of the bonds, and it's really part of the interest cost that we measure when we take competitive bids on the bonds. We're estimating that at 0.8% or $121,000, and that would be the maximum that we would allow. The other category of costs is called legal and fiscal costs. That includes the fees to Ellers as financial advisor, to your bond attorney, to the rating agency that will provide a credit rating on your bonds, and some other incidental costs, and we're estimating that at $68,000. You also, we're factoring in a small estimate of investment earnings. So when you issue the bonds, you get all the money up front. You'll be spending the money over a period of many months, probably a couple of years, I would think, for these projects. And you'll have the opportunity to invest the money during that time. You can't make much on your investments right now, but you can make a little bit. So we're estimating investment earnings at $56,000. So you issue $15,135,000 in bonds, and we estimate you would have just over $15 million to spend on your projects. Any questions about that? Okay. And we've prepared debt service schedules for both the $10 million option and the $15 million option. I'm just showing you the $15 million one here. If you want to see the $10 million one, I have copies with me I can hand out, but it looks very similar, except the numbers are a little bit smaller. So a couple of the key assumptions on this page. We're assuming with election in November, the bonds would probably be sold in December or early January, and the closing would be around February 1st of 2014. If it's a little earlier, there'll be a little more interest that first year, but that's our best estimate at this point. We're showing here an average interest rate of 2.3%. That's a little higher than where rates are right now, probably about 0.4% higher than rates are right now. Rates are at very, very low levels, not quite record lows. We saw record lows back last November and December, but they're still very low. So there's probably a decent chance that rates will be higher by January or December when we sell these bonds. So we're hedging a little bit by putting the rate a little bit higher. So this is a conservative estimate. The other factor I'll point out is we have estimates here of the district's tax capacity, total tax capacity of all taxable property in the district for taxes payable in 2013. That was $45,677,000. We have preliminary estimates from Hennepin County for the next year. This is the 2013 values that will be used for 2014 property taxes. And the good news is, after several years of declines, Hennepin County is showing a slight increase in your tax capacity. We're estimating about 0.5% increase. Beyond that, we haven't assumed any further increases. So we've assumed no additional growth in tax capacity, and we have a level payment structure for these bonds. So in the future, if tax capacities increase, as it seems, you know, I'm an optimistic guy, I guess. I feel like property values are going to go up, and you're probably going to have some redevelopment going on in this district in new construction, and that will cause your tax capacity to increase, and that will cause the tax rate in future years to decline slightly. But we have not built in any growth into the tax capacity. We're showing levies for your existing debt, your voter-approved bonds, and your OPEB bonds. Every year, you're required to levy taxes equal to 105% of the next year's principal and interest payments. If you do that every year, you build up an excess, a fund balance, a larger and larger fund balance in your debt service fund. But it protects you in case there are tax delinquencies or appeals on taxes. So as your fund balance builds up, you're required to reduce your levy then by what's called a debt excess. So we have estimates of that in there for future years as well. So we show your net levy, for example, for taxes payable in 2014. For existing debt, it's 14.93. The next sets of columns in the middle there are where we show the estimated taxes on the new debt. This is the wraparound schedule that I'm talking about. You're in a fortunate position in this district because you only have 6 years left to pay on all of your existing bonds. After 6 more years to levy, at least. After taxes payable in 2019, you will have no more debt service levies if you don't issue more debt. So we could structure this with level payments on the new debt, but that would cause a larger tax increase. This year, we're using what is a very common financing structure for school districts, a wraparound structure, in this case paying interest only for those first 6 years and then paying off the principal very quickly over the next 3 years. And it's probably easier to see this with the graph that's on the next page. So we show here in blue the estimated tax rates for the existing debt, and then in red the estimated tax rates for the new debt. So some people have said, how can we issue $15 million in bonds and have such a small tax increase? It's because we're recommending that you consider using this structure of payments. If you wanted to use a different structure where we had level payments every year, that would make these red bars in the first 6 years higher and make them lower in the later years. So that's totally the board's call, and I just want you to be clear that the tax estimates that we have prepared are based on this structure. Any questions about that?
So on the long run, because we catch up so quickly that after the 6 years, what's the net effect of 9 years on the interest then? By only paying interest only early on, is there a big difference in the interest payment?
You mean as opposed to if you, yeah, Sandy asked me that this morning, and I said I could prepare that, but I didn't get time to prepare it today. I mean, it depends on how many years you would go out too. I mean, like I said, you could go out 20 years for payments. You could go out 30 years for payments. So, and 20 years is fairly typical. So, I think if you went out 20 years, your interest payments would be higher. We're estimating here about $2.8 million in interest payments. Obviously, if you started paying principal right away and paid it off in 9 years, it would be less. I don't have the figure off the top of my head for what that would be. It would mean a lower interest rate, as well as a lower average interest rate, as well as lower total interest cost. And we could certainly, if the board's interested in looking at that, we can prepare that maybe for a work session or something like that in the future. Okay. So this shows the tax impact for both. The left-hand column is the $10,105,000 option. The right-hand column is the $15,135,000 option, and then the middle column is the difference. If you were to vote on these as separate questions, which is another topic we need to talk about, then that would show the tax impact for the separate questions. And again, this is just showing the change in taxes in 2014. If you go back to this, you see that the payments in those last 3 years, 2020 through 22, the tax levies in those years for the new bonds would be higher than they are in the first years, but that would be offset by reductions in levies for your existing bonds. So we're just showing really the size of that red bar in that first year is the tax impact that we're showing. And that's how much people's taxes would increase above what they would pay without the bond referendum in next year. So again, if you go to that $200,000 house, the $10 million is $10. That's pretty easy to remember. The $5 million addition would be another $5, and the total is $15. And you see the impact on businesses, apartments, and higher valued homes as well. And the other topic I want to mention, and we've talked with Sandy about this a number of times, a bond refunding. A little history on this. The district issued a $46 million bond issue in 2000 after the bond referendum in 1999. Those bonds were refunded or refinanced. In our industry, we have to use a term that people don't understand, so we call it a refunding instead of a refinancing. Somebody decided that many years ago. So they were refunded once already in 2005. You can only do one of what's called an advance refunding out of a bond issue, so, but you can do multiple current refundings. So we will have an opportunity to refund those bonds again in the fall of this year. We probably would recommend that you sell bonds perhaps in early October. We can't close on the new bond issue earlier than November 4th. So if we sold bonds maybe at your first board meeting in October, that'd be about the earliest we would want to sell the bonds to lock in the interest rates at that time. Our latest estimates that refunding would reduce your debt service payments and your tax levies, this is a savings to the taxpayers, by approximately $2,240,000 or $373,000 per year for taxes payable in 2014 through 19. So those last 6 years that you have left to pay on your bonds, we estimate it would reduce payments and levies by $373,000 per year. So we put together kind of a combined tax impact table that shows the increase in the capital projects levy. This is all for taxes payable in 2014. Bond question 1, if you decide to do separate questions, the $10,105,000 option. The bond question 2, the total for all 3 questions. So again, if you go to that $200,000 home, the total impact of the 3 questions is $30 per year. And the refunding of the 2005B bonds, we estimate, would decrease your taxes by $15 a year. Now, we have to be clear in communicating to the public that the 2 things are really not related. They're related to each other because it's all property taxes, but the referendum will increase your taxes by the amount shown in that second column from the right, but it will be offset by a savings from the refunding. Any questions about that?
Yeah, just so I'm clear, looking at those last 2 columns, so for a home valued at $200,000, the increase is 30, but if we refund, as you said, we save 15. So the net impact on the taxpayer is an increase of $15. Am I reading that right?
If you want to look at it that way, putting everything together. Now, there are other things that will cause your levies to change from this year to next year. The folks meeting in St. Paul this week are going to have some impact on that. I think there is some money targeted for tax relief for schools, so there may be other reductions in your levies. I don't think it'll be anything dramatic, but there may be other reductions in your levies. So that could factor into this as well. But that's correct.
On your interest rate, I think the 2.3%, you said that was a conservative number. Right now, if we did today, it'd be a lower number.
Yes.
Okay. How about on the refunding side? Did you use a conservative number there as well? I mean, now we're projecting out to October, and I know that you don't read the future, but you're being conservative on that and barring any kind of major change and whatever you think.
I think we used rates that were maybe 0.25% higher than current rates for the refunding. That was last week, and then rates have gone up about 10 basis points since last week. So. But they fluctuate up and down all the time, obviously. So that's a reasonable estimate. We'll know more when we'll know exactly how much when we sell the bonds.
Well, that's true. But when we go out to our voters, and I know this will be a piece of it, that's why I want to know it's conservative. I mean, we want to be transparent and honest. So I guess I would push for using a conservative, and that we kind of update it, you know, where we are at any given point in time, because we want to be clear.
Yeah, you know, in any bond referendum, any kind of referendum like this, there has to come a point where you say, these are our best estimates, and we're going to use these with the public. And usually we don't change those unless something really dramatic changes, and then we might update them. But you know, that's probably going to be a little closer to the election date. I'm not sure when you're going to start your informational campaign, but at that point, we'll update all of these figures.
Thank you.
Thank you,
then I have one other slide. Options for ballot structure and language. These are things the board's going to need to wrestle with. Again, you don't need to decide this, I don't think, for submitting the review and comment, but One of the next steps in the process will be to adopt a resolution calling for the election that will determine the ballot language. And you could do all of this as one question. You can combine a capital projects levy or your technology levy and a bond question all in one question. Your 1999 question was like that. It combined both into one. And I think it might have been the first down payment levy at that time that I ever worked on, or that maybe that Ellers ever worked on. So it could be all combined in one question. You could have two questions with a separate question for the technology levy renewal and increase, and then all the bond projects, the $15,135,000 all in one question, or you could have three questions. The technology levy, the deferred maintenance, and the additions. Ultimately, you can have as many questions as you want, but those are kind of the main options. And if you have multiple questions, then you need to determine what's the order of the questions and whether some questions are contingent on others passing. So those are issues that the board's going to need to wrestle with fairly soon.
So the ballot language, if in any of these, in the cases of the additions or the deferred maintenance, it'll have a short paragraph that'll say it's $10 million. Will it say a time period over which it's paid, or how does that work?
The ballot language is largely dictated by state law, but there is some latitude in it. So it normally says, for example, if you do all your bond questions in one, it will say, shall the board, and I don't have it exactly memorized, but something along the line, shall the board be allowed to issue $15,135,000 in bonds to finance the acquisition and betterment of school facilities. And then you can editorialize a little bit. You can say, including deferred maintenance and additions to schools ABC. It won't say the number of years. It won't say the tax increase. That'll be in your informational materials.
And then in terms of the tech levy,
right?
Would it be structured to say the 1.75 million, or would it be structured to say that incremental? It
would
value?
say. It has to state the tax rate that'll be used to calculate the levy and the estimated annual amount. And because you have 1 year left on your existing levy, it would have to be structured so that it would say you're revoking the last year of the levy authorized in 1999 and replacing it with this new levy that's estimated to raise $1,750,000 per year for 10 years. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. It gets pretty long. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Sandy, anything else that you want to add? Okay. Joel, thank you very much.
Joe did a great job at explaining it.
Okay. Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is our school report from Susan Lingard. This is our team with Frank Johnson.
Okay, I think we're all plugged in. I'm Frank Johnson, and this is Kelly Etienne Artosa. and we are here to report on last year, which feels a little, trying to remember last year, but we think we have it figured out. So year 2 of Susan Lingard Elementary School, and I describe it that way because we really were a new school 3 years ago, and so this is our 2nd year. In the context, come on, uh-oh. Yes, in the context of our strategic objective as a district, to close our gap and have high achievement for all students, in our 2nd year, we really had 4 major initiatives. And they were to improve reading instruction at Susan Lingard, to improve math instruction, to implement our IB program, and to close the achievement gap, increasing our focus on equity. Our reading goal was that 90% of all of our students in grade 3, 4, and 5, including 77% of our black students, would meet the standards of the MCA 3 reading test. Our results were that 78% of our students in grades 3, 4, and 5, including 53% of our black students, reached that goal. So we did not reach the goal. We did not reach our goal. However, we did work on the gap, and we were successful with our Hispanic students and not as successful with our black students. Our black students, actually, the gap increased between white and black students from 29% to 35%, but our gap with Hispanic students decreased from 28% to 6%. We made AYP in all categories, so at least as the state would have us, we met our goals for AYP.
So for our 2nd year in reading, we continued to implement the district literacy framework, and that meant those top 3 items, and those are critical for effective instruction and student achievement. Additionally, we worked on comprehension strategies that are advocated by the National Reading Panel, and that included using graphic organizers, such as at our school we use thinking maps. We have people who are well trained in that and have trained others on our staff, along with working on summarizing and retelling in the lower grade levels. Where are we? So we also did a push-in model for SciUp, which is with our ELL learners for our teacher. And we moved our reading intervention to a 3-to-1 ratio. And the reasons for that are very well supported by various research. And it also allows our staff to work more collaboratively so that we're providing consistent instruction between the classroom teacher and then the specialists who work with those students. During our PLCs, last year was the first year that we collaborated with the University of Minnesota, developing a oral fluency assessment called FAST. We were, for lack of a better word, some of their test bunnies to learn how to, they collected the data from us and our feedback, and in turn we were allowed to use their product for free. So that was, you know, a win-win for everybody. For that, we screen the students 3 times during the year, every student, and that provides an overall benchmark achievement in oral reading fluency for all of our students. If the students don't attain the benchmark level, then they're put into a progress monitoring group, and the teachers use the FAST assessment to progress monitor those students on their oral reading achievement weekly, using a 1-minute timing and then also doing intervention things to improve their oral reading fluency. We also use diagnostic assessments to help further the teacher's understanding of students who are having a breakdown in their comprehension in order to better target their needs in reading in fluency as well as comprehension, because as we know, reading is all about meaning, not just what we can say. we continued to integrate our reading instruction throughout our units of inquiry, which are our IB units. And as we did that, we thought more critically about for example, if we're teaching how the world works, which is typically a very science-heavy unit, that it made good sense to be teaching comparing and contrasting during that particular unit. So that allowed us to use the literature that we've gathered and use that across the content areas so that our units are more transdisciplinary. So the students, they might be learning about science during reading, and they don't really realize, they don't necessarily know when science time is or social studies time because it's all integrated throughout their whole day. We also worked together to create a school literacy team, and that helped. In our first year, we planned a We Read Every Day program that we started this past year, and that's to facilitate reading at home. It started this year. We have a super duper heavy plastic bag that every child takes home, and it describes the benefits of reading every night. So the student is taking home a book at their level of readability to read and participate in reading at home every night, because as we know, that really makes improvements in how well they're doing.
So hang on, before you move on to math, I was wondering if you could give us an indication of why you saw the improvement that you saw in Hispanic students. Did it have to do with this push-in model, or what was it that you can attribute that to?
I would attribute part of it to the SIOP model. I would attribute it to increased staffing. We got another half a staff person midstream, and that allowed us to cover those children during reading time.
Frank, was that half student, half faculty, was that for just Hispanic, or was that for all?
That was for ELL.
For ELL?
For ELL.
Okay.
And most of those students are Hispanic, so. Okay.
So I just want to make sure I understand this. So in a lot of the increase, was it about 59% increase? Well, from 59 to 6 gap. That decrease was due to a half a person?
No, I wouldn't say mostly to that half person, partly to that half person.
Partly.
I would say mostly to the SIOP model. And I will say there's a factor of children in there as well. It's a different cohort. So.
Okay.
Okay. Our 2012 site math goal was that 77% of our students in grades 3, 4, and 5, including 57% of black students, would meet the standards of the MC3 math test. And our result was that 60% of our students, including 27% of black students, met the standards. And I can only thank my peers for telling me to have courage as I say that, because we struggled as a district last year, and I guess I'm not alone, but it doesn't feel good to have our results look like that. Our gap increased with black students from 43 to 48%, and with Hispanic students from 35 to 40%. We did make AYP in 6 out of 7 categories, free and reduced lunch being the one category that we did not make it. Our math program in our second year was pretty much that we taught math expressions, which is our textbook. We had monthly PLC meetings where we followed the district pacing guides, which are about staying together as a team, teaching units together, certainly discussing them. But in the context of one meeting a month, not a great deal of emphasis on our part on math in our second year. We did take a workshop on how to get online instructional support, and that's been in effect this year, but it wasn't in effect last year. We learned that last spring.
So as our second year as a reorganized IB school, we finished rewriting all of our units of inquiry, incorporating the newly adopted social studies standards. And that meant some really big changes for some of our units of inquiry. For example, Explorers and Native Americans had been a unit or part of the standards in 4th grade, but they moved up to 5th grade. Civil War was part of the 5th grade units or standards, and now that's moved up. But another big emphasis that's been added to the social studies standards across, even beginning in kindergarten, is economics. So thinking about how to authentically incorporate all of that has taken some time. I think we're well in place now to understand and how to best be transdisciplinary and teach all of that within our units of inquiry. We also worked hard on updating all of our policies in preparation for our evaluation visit that happened this year. So we were pretty busy last year with that. We also updated our site action plan, which hadn't been updated since before the reconfiguration. So that was a good thing to look at, to see where we were after authorization and where we had come that first year of reconfiguration and where we needed to go. That was a really powerful process for our staff. It helped us to acknowledge the areas of growth that we had made, especially in transdisciplinary work, but it also showed us where we needed work. And I think one of the areas that came to our attention was that we needed to work harder working with our students who, as in IB languages, mother tongue isn't English, and how do we facilitate the opportunity for those students to grow both in English and in their home language, because we don't want them to lose that. So that was something that we acknowledged in the action plan and have started to address.
In our second year, we started an equity team that met monthly to try to close the gap and to consider how we might make our school more welcoming for minority children. We responded to the identified concerns of the 2011 Equity Walk. In our case, it meant making our school visually welcome to Black and brown students, that they could see themselves in the institution visually, and also our use of volunteers. We were advised to use our volunteers to serve our higher achieving students and our teachers to serve our neediest students. Most of us on the staff read a book called Culturally Responsive Teaching and Learning, and we took lessons from that in our staff meetings, sometimes last year and sometimes this year as well. We continued to provide staff training, including Beyond Diversity and other WEMEP offerings. I think last year we reached the point where we have one staff member who has not attended Beyond Diversity. And we studied cultural relevance with Bhavata Akansanya. We had a number of improvements to our facility that I just thought I should mention, as long as we're talking about what happened in our second year, that made a big difference for us. This is a picture of a hill that used to have a playground that was kind of in the hill, and experts told us it was dangerous, and the reason we were breaking arms with kids, it wasn't appropriate for little kids. So that became a hill, and it not only is safer, but it caused kids to be able to go sliding in the winter, which is pretty nice. And we built a playground. We took the equipment that we had, which became a third of what our new playground is. We took the equipment from Elliott, and then we got a new third, which meant we had enough equipment and appropriate equipment on our playground, and it's made a huge difference to behavior at recess. This picture doesn't capture it very well, but if you look along the windows, there are these wooden strips on there, and if you have microscopic vision, you can see the coat hooks on those bars, and they go all the way around the lunchroom, so kids can hang up their coats and snow pants in the winter when they come into the lunchroom, instead of sitting on their wet clothes or in their wet clothes, which has made our lunch a very pleasant place. And if you know the building, it used to be that the end of our hallways were very dark, and we opened up those ends, and there's glass now, and you can see pine trees, and it just has a nice feel if you're in the hallway at Susan Lingard. So we are thankful that the board supported those projects, and they've made a difference to how it feels to work at Susan Lingard. So what have we been doing this year?
So we've been working on our reading goal, and a big portion of that was working again with the University of Minnesota, but working on an early reading assessment. So for our K and 1 students, we'd always had an assessment, but it had varied from not only maybe site to site, but even among teachers. And so working with the University of Minnesota on the early reading assessment has allowed us to have the same assessment in every site, administered the same way among teachers 3 times during the year. And again, we're working with them. They're taking our data, and their goal is to find, now it's quite a lengthy assessment because with young students, you have to do them one-to-one. You can't give them a test. You have to sit there. But the really wonderful thing about it is it's on the computer. And so all of the data that I used to pore over trying to figure out how to make groups and what those students needed is now all really pretty and in graphs and desegregated and all these fabulous things. So it's really been a powerful thing. Their goal is to help us find 3 to 4 subtests. Right now I think we give, I don't know, 6 or 7, and it takes probably 15 to 20 minutes depending on how often the kid tells you about their puppy or whatever in between. That we can give to every student as a screener and then use some of the other subtests as diagnostics assessments that we're using, like we are with the upper grade levels. So that's been a really wonderful thing, and all the teachers are appreciating it a lot and understanding its value. I guess I would also like to say that our book collections have continued to increase. They really support all the different units of inquiry and just reading in general. And, oh, it's time for a scan. How about now, huh? But at any rate, it's important that we continue to build those book collections because books do get lost, or they might not look as pretty when the students get done with them. And we want to keep building that along, and we can never have enough books. So we'll continue to work on that. Let's see, did it move? Oh, it's being angry, so I'm going to move ahead. Oh, there we go. Ooh. Am I on the right spot? Yep, okay. So the other things that we did in reading were we developed scope and sequence maps so that we could consider not only the benchmarks and where we had placed them in every unit of inquiry, but also where it seemed appropriate for the students' development in their own reading process. So for example, Who We Are is a unit that many of the students or teams use at the beginning of the year. It's obviously about the students, but it seems logical to teach personal narrative during that time. Well, what also seems logical to teach with personal narrative? Sequencing, transitional words, all these different kinds of things. So making sure that we are being very thoughtful about what we're placing in there and talking with each other about best practice during those particular units and how the reading and writing fits with that. So the pieces of this puzzle are starting to really fit together nicely, and I think people really appreciate that. So this year, the first 2 years, I didn't work with the team specifically on math. I joined them this year, and we worked heavily on working on some critical outcomes. As you know, there are standards at every grade level, and there are many standards at every grade level. And so it was time for us to analyze those standards and really look at them deeply to consider which ones are the most important. And not only did we do that, and that's not to say that all of them aren't important, but what were the ones that, wow, if a third grader can't do that, we're worried. And then to allow those third grade teachers the opportunity to talk with the second grade teachers and the fourth grade teachers. So we were facilitating that vertical understanding of where they're coming from and where they're headed has really been a powerful experience. We even brought over a sixth grade teacher to meet with our fifth grade teachers so we could work on that jump over to the middle school in order to make sure that we were aligning with their expectations and what they understood what we had to cover as well. After that, the teachers looked at their curricular materials to see how all of that fit and whether or not they needed to supplement or add more emphasis to these particular outcomes. So this is year 3 in IB, and it was a really exciting year for us. We finished our self-study, which was an incredibly lengthy but very powerful process. I submitted that document to them on December 2nd. It was about 70 pages. I was pretty excited when I pushed upload and it went away. And then they came to visit us in the end of February. And that was a really great experience to have them come and visit us. And I think, Bruce, you were in the room, having the parents talk about the program and how they are using the language of the learner profile, and they hear their kids talking with each other about, oh, well, that's not what I did and where we are in place and time, or they all are talking the same talk. And not just inside our walls, but outside of our walls as well. So I wished I would have had a little camera on there, because I think we don't always know what happens after we get out of, the kids get out outside of our walls. And I think the teachers, it just made you feel really good to see that happen. As well as the evaluation, we worked on adding a community or parent involvement opportunity in one unit of inquiry at every grade level. So for example, our third graders do a Sharing the Planet, and that's where they learn about adaptations in animals, both physical and behavioral. And at the end, their summative assessment is to create their own animal. But that animal might have, I don't know, the wings of a duck and the pincers of a lobster. But they make up a name for that animal, and when you come and talk to them, they're very aware of the adaptations and why that animal has that adaptation and which biome it needs to live in. And those opportunities for the kids to share publicly their work are really powerful, and also help facilitate as they move up to 5th grade, where they do exhibition. And we finished our second exhibition about 2 weeks ago, I guess it was. And they did a great job. We moved to a more formal speech opportunity during the day, where they shared with particular grade levels, and then we had our open forum that we did the first year in the evening as well. And again, the kids, they felt they felt compelled to take action. And so it's going to be pretty exciting. We're having a planting day in the end of May, and our 5th graders are going to lead that. And they could probably tell you more about carbon than you'd ever want to know, maybe even. I guess the last thing I would say about IB is we've been really fortunate that the IB has offered training here in Minneapolis the past 3 years. And so that has allowed us to send 15 people the last 2 years, and this year we sent 11 people to training in April. And some of them were new staff because we're required to train them, but a lot of them were experienced staff. And everyone left those trainings and felt they were really powerful trainings and really good trainings, and brought them back to share with their peers and to implement into their units of inquiry. So it's been a great year, and we're excited to see what our report says. We haven't received that yet, but maybe in June, I don't know.
Our equity team continued to meet this year and to plan activities for our staff meetings and for our releases. We started several of our staff meetings with equity tips, which were mostly suggestions from Shiraki Holly's book. We reviewed data at a staff meeting about our ELL students to try to improve our performance with them. We read a book called Somalis in Minnesota and hosted the author for a release workshop to learn about that population. We have a significant Somali population, and it was an excellent workshop for us. We hosted Carmen Verdeen to learn ways to serve our Latino students, and we reviewed our recess and discipline data quarterly with a focus on our Black and brown students. Our behavior assistant created that data for us and shared what kinds of behaviors we were experiencing at recess and helped us change those behaviors. And our end picture is, I'll just say it's our poster child for our foundation grant for We Read Every Day. So she's reading a book from her We Read Every Day folder. And it used to say the end on that screen, but it doesn't anymore. So.
Questions?
Joe?
Yeah, so first of all, going back to what I was saying a few minutes ago, that improvement in the Hispanic population in reading was phenomenal. So thank you for taking me through why you thought that was. On the flip side, and you guys have admitted to it, the math scores just aren't there. So as I'm going through the presentation and looking at this, I see your reading scores and what you've done to get where you've been, and you've laid out a lot of things that you've done. When I look at the math scores, I'm not sure, and maybe it's just a disconnect with me from the presentation, but I'm not seeing that level of analysis with the math, trying to dig into why the scores are where they're at. So if you could just maybe, and maybe it has to do with determining these critical outcomes, but if you could just kind of take me through where you're going next on the math side, please.
Right. I think there's criticism of American math curriculum in general, that it's an inch deep and 10 miles wide. And this attempt to reduce this to 7 to 10 outcomes instead of 25 to 35 is an attempt to say we are going to focus on these things and we're going to make sure kids have them. And so number sense is a big part of that. And those 7 to 10, by focusing on them and treating them in the PLC as something with pre-test, post-test, and focus on it as opposed to turning to this chapter and moving through this chapter, is a huge undertaking. It was certainly the biggest thing we did this fall. We worked on it up through December as our #1 priority this year. So that's this year, though, not last year.
And then those particular items, how did you zero in on those? Is that data from tests where it's a particular subjects or problems that they're having issues with, or how did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, I think we looked at test specs, but I think the issue is what things are critical. So, for example, do kids really need to spend a lot of time learning about time, how to tell time in 2nd grade? Or do they need, more importantly, to learn about number sense? And I think the discussion was, what are the critical things that will carry them forward?
And
it's trying to reduce, I mean, I believe the number is 36 essential outcomes in 5th, 6th grade now, 5th grade now. And so to ask a teacher to focus on 26 or 36 essential outcomes is kind of like a 1/2 inch wide and 20 miles wide, you know? And to do 7 really well to 10 really well is a very different thing.
I like that you're intentionally looking at the 2nd graders and instilling those core things that they need to know. Do you have access to the, like, say, the MCA tests to see where the deficiencies were, or is it just here's your number?
We have access to that, but it was pretty universally low.
But it's just the strands, it's not necessarily.
Right. I mean, everybody in the state fell. I would say our fall is parallel to that. And I would say this performance is consistent with the year before that. And we did not put great emphasis on math in our 2nd year. We put great emphasis on reading in our 2nd year, and IB. We put great emphasis on math this year. So hopefully we'll see results.
Nancy?
Yeah, Frank, having listened to the presentation and heard you talk, it really does sound like there's a lot of good work happening at Susan Lingard and a lot of, regrouping in a new school. And, the scores we were looking at are one data point, and we really do look at multiple data points. And I really am optimistic, as are you, that when you're back here next year, we're going to see a change, the right trend line, both for reading and math, because we have to do everything. We can't just focus on one or the other, because our kids need all of it, as you know. I was really pleased to hear about the vertical alignment, because that had been my hope when we went to K-5, that we would have teachers across multiple grades talking to each other and internally working on that alignment and what kids need in both the formal way and an informal way. And so I was really pleased to hear that that is part of what's happening at Susan Lingard. So thank you for sharing that.
We also connected with the middle school, our 5th grade teachers with 6th grade.
I also want to follow up on one of Kelly's comments. I was there for the evaluation, and to hear those parents speak to IB was just inspirational. I mean, just because the kids are bringing it home, they're talking it at home, they're sharing what they're learning in school. And again, as Nancy said, we have many data points. Hearing the parents, that kind of feedback from them was really inspirational. The other thing is you're mentioning of your involving parents. I'm not sure I heard it quite correctly, or I can say it back to you correctly, but the involvement of parents in one or more of the IB classroom activities is really powerful also, and obviously we encourage that. I know, you're doing it, so I know you're encouraging it, but I think everybody should be doing that and pulling the parents in and getting them involved, whether it's with a bag that goes home at night or some other way to get them involved. I think that's excellent. Thank you. Thank you. We appreciate your report, and we look forward to hearing about year 3 and the great success that you're having. Next item on the agenda, MMR building goal setting, accountability rules, and changing discussion. This is Prachi.
Good evening, everyone. So like Bruce said, I'm here to talk about what has changed with accountability rules and with special attention to goal setting with respect to student achievement goals and graduation rates. So in short, NCLB was written into law in 2002, and now we're in the realm of the Minnesota waiver. And with what happened under NCLB is that we had proficiency standards, so these are based on student achievement in reading and math, and they aimed at 100% proficiency by 2014 in reading and math for all student groups at all grade levels. So the 100% was universal across all these different categories. And NCLB was due for reauthorization in 2007, and when it languished and nothing happened for several years, then in 2011, the US Department of Education invited all states to apply for flexibility regarding these requirements. And the federal government had certain parameters that had to be attended to in the applications. So the waiver for Minnesota was approved, and this is just a very brief outline of what stayed the same and what didn't. So what stayed the same, the content standards, the assessments that were used, we used the state assessments, MCAs, during NCLB, and we continue to use those. Public reporting, adequate yearly progress, and disaggregated results. And what has changed is that with respect to those adequate yearly progress targets, those targets were reset. And in addition, towards the end, you'll see that what was introduced is that there should be growth shown for students during 1 year, so 2 years of scores. If you took 2 years of scores, students should show growth, as well as show reduction of achievement gap between traditionally low-performing groups and higher-performing groups. These were new with the waiver. Under the waiver, this system is called multiple measurement rating, the MMR. And it's called that way because it's based on multiple measures, and all schools are given an MMR score. And depending on whether a school has graduation rates applicable or not, which would be high schools, it can get scores on up to 4 domains. So proficiency, which is similar to what we had under AYP, student growth, and then achievement gap closure. And in addition, if it's a Title I school, they can get a designation based on their MMR score compared to the rest of the schools in the state. So I know this is frequently confusing, and I was, perhaps you had some questions when Susan Lingard was presenting its data, but the confusion comes from 2-3 things. First of all, NCLB and waiver. What changed is that the end year is now 2017. So instead of 2014, it's 2017. NCLB had the same goal of 100% proficiency, but under the waiver, different proficiency goals have been set by grade level, by content area, and by student group. And it's based on wherever the group or the grade level was with respect to its content area in 2011. So 2011 is baseline, and everything for 2017 is projected based on 2011. So the new goals don't specifically focus on reducing the achievement gap. So if a group started lower in 2011, they will end up lower in 2017. However, because the goal is to have non-proficient, the group that starts lower is going to have to get more students to become proficient by 2017. So I hope this example will clarify what I just said. So if you have 2 student groups, and group 1, 50% are not proficient in 2011, they will have to get 25% more students proficient by 2017 to have that 50%. In group 2, let's say 14% are not proficient in 2011, they'll have to get 7% more students to proficiency by 2017.
Is there something to that standard, or is it pretty arbitrary to just say, cut it in half?
Yeah, it was pretty arbitrary. It was seen as doable because we weren't statewide, there wasn't a lot of progress being made in closing the gap, and they felt like this would be more achievable. And there wasn't a specific parameter around that. They just had to show that they were working on closing the gap.
I would just add the point that 100% proficient by 2014 was also arbitrary and not based on an admirable, both are admirable goals. Neither had any evidence or research to say they were the appropriate numbers.
So this is just a slice out of the goals that were released statewide based on 2011 baseline. What we have, the document that we have from the state gives you for every student group, every grade level, and both reading and math, separate goals, because it's based on where they were in 2011. And here you can see that if you look at the first row, that's all students, 3rd grade, there was 79% proficiency in 2011 statewide. So that's about 21% non-proficient, and that means about 10% more has to become proficient by 2017. So you see that in 2017, 89% of all students are expected to be proficient. And then I have black students and white students, grade 3, and black students and white students, grade 11 for math. And what you can see is that the black and white gap in 3rd grade is 29 percentage points in 2011. And by 2017, it'll be reduced to 15% if those targets are met. For grade 11, where math performance tends to be lower as you go up the grade levels, actually both in reading and math, in grade 11, the gap is 39 percentage points in 2011. And it goes down to 20% points in 2017. However, we are still going to have 62% black students proficient in 2017 compared to 82% white students because of where they're starting out.
Prachi, is this chart for St. Louis Park? goals?
It's statewide.
So these are statewide goals.
Yes.
Are we then to meet these goals, or do we have another chart that reflects our goals?
We'll get to that. The answer is no, but we'll get to that.
And it's more than just this is just an example, right? There's other groups than just the black and white.
Yes. Every student group that we're accountable for under NCLB or MMR, which is the all-student group, American Indians, Hispanics, blacks, whites, free and reduced lunch, English learners, and special education. 9 groups. And there's some minimum student group requirements in order for this calculation to apply. Here's an example of reading. And again, I have grades 4 and 7. So black students and white students in grades 4. You can see that the gap they start out with in 2011 is 23% points in reading. And by 2017, if those targets are met, then the gap will be 11%. And in grade 7, the gap will go from 18% to 9 percentage points. So here's where some of the difficulty comes about in terms of we didn't meet our goal, but we met AYP. How did that happen? Under AYP, the rules that apply are different as to how you meet your goal. So first of all, there are 4 levels of achievement that you can receive, that a student can receive on a state test. They can get a numeric score, and corresponding to that numeric score, you either are at does not meet standards, partially meet standards, or exceed standards. And when we set proficiency goals, we are only talking about students who are at meets or exceeds. So the chart that you looked at, the last 2 charts, are talking about students who are at meets or exceeds. Now, under AYP rules, let's get back to the proficiency goal column. So if the goal is 37% proficiency for black students in grade 11 math, it means that 37 out of 100 students have to be at meets or exceeds. Now, if you move over to the AYP proficiency target, let's say it's the same goal, 37%. Here, you are able to generate points not just for meets or exceeds, but also for partially meets. You get half a point for that. So you can still meet that goal of 37% AYP proficiency if you have 20 students who are proficient and 34 who are at partially meets. So as I'm sure you can see, 37% proficiency goal may not have been met, but you would have met your AYP proficiency target. And in addition to this, what also happens is that you can meet AYP proficiency targets through multi-year averaging. So if this year's results don't generate the number of points that you need, it's allowed that we can do 2 years of averaging or 3 years of averaging.
So would that mean if you did not meet it that first year, would you have not met it until the next year and you average those 2 and you meet it? Or how does that work? Or how would that be communicated?
If I didn't meet in 2012, if my scores from 2012 show that I'm not meeting it, then my scores from 11 and 12 can be averaged. And yeah. Another thing, and this has to do with Nancy's question, is that the AYP proficiency goals are generated by school. It's generated based on the number of students who have taken the test. A minimum of 20 students have to have taken the test, and a minimum of 20 students who are enrolled on October 1 need to have taken the test the following spring for a target to be generated. The target is adjusted based on the number of students testing. So it's often much lower. Depending on the number of students who have tested, it can be a lot lower than the state targets that we saw. So that allows another level of ease, if you will, to meeting the targets. and becomes difficult to pinpoint exactly what our specific target is going to be, because the state runs those calculations after it verifies how many students tested who were actually enrolled on October 1, and they build a confidence band around it. So briefly again, MMR proficiency, we already went over this, that the targets were reset to have the non-proficiency by 2017. Now, the additional thing that has happened now based on the same test is that not only do schools earn points, MMR points, based on weighted percentage of student groups making AYP proficiency targets, they can also generate points for student growth and for reducing the gap. And although it's the same test, it is capable of measuring growth, much like NWA MAP measures growth. So if you remember, MAP also generates targets for students based on their starting score. So whatever the starting score is in the fall, there is an expected growth by the end of the year. In the same way, MCA gives us targets by student, and then averages all of that for the school to generate growth points for the school. So this test is now doing triple duty, because it's not only showing you whether you've met standards, are you proficient on the standards, it's also showing have you grown, and then using the same growth component, it's looking at student groups, Black, Hispanic, Native American, and Asian Islanders and Asian Pacific Islanders, and comparing them to whites. How much did white students grow? Did our Black students grow more than that? How much did white students grow? That's coming from the state, okay? And how much did our Black students grow? That's our Black students being compared to, did we beat that or not?
So we're not comparing our Black students to our white students. It's the white is the statewide.
Yes, that's a more reliable statistic, with so many white students at the state level, or non-English learners are being compared to our English learners. So with MMR, what's publicly reported are these scores in each domain: proficiency, growth, and reduction of achievement gap. And for the high school, graduation rate is also part of that fourth domain. The data that's shared is the scores in each domain, but at the school level, we have access to very specific data. We can look at how much each one of our students grew. We can look at our own Black student growth. It's not broken down like that for public reporting. And the idea is that schools are going to use this data to look at their own performance and analyze where they're making growth and where they need to make improvements. And schools should not be compared to one another. However, on MDE's website, you can go and pick schools, up to 2 schools that you want to compare. And before, under their older AYP format, you could ask the database to pick schools who were within plus minus 5% of your size, or free and reduced lunch population, et cetera. You can no longer do that. So that creates difficulties. So coming to this very sticky topic of school achievement goals, in the past, the goals that were generated for the schools to set as their goals were aligned with that AYP target of 100% proficiency. So based on the distance that any school's results had from 100% and the number of years to 2014, we'd just take equal chunks, saying this is how much we have to grow every year. And since 2012, we have set it to align with the statewide targets that I shared with you.
You use the state goals, that 2-page chart are the ones we're using for our goals, rather than, it's not taking where the students in Lingard that we heard about tonight are and where they need to be. We're just talking about the statewide numbers.
Correct. And what we could do, Julie, is look at, can we have our achievement gap and generate numbers based on that? However, that will give rise to some other issues, which I hope to clarify here. So here's an example. School 1 has 73% proficient Black students in reading in 2012, and School 2 has 58% proficient. These are two of our schools. I've not mentioned the name here. The goal based on the waiver would be 73% proficient in 2013. So as you can see, School 1 is already there. So that goal, what we did last year is if they were already there, I asked principals to either increase it by 2% or 5%, whatever they felt was achievable. Now School 2 has a huge gap to make up from 58% to 73%. So because the number of points that are being generated on MMR have to do with growth and closing the gap, so simply, and the fact that the AYP target is set after our students have tested, we are not aware of it beforehand. That's why the statewide goals are used as a proxy, as an indicator of where we need to be by 2014. And I would like to get your input today from the board, what you would like us to take into consideration, what you would like principals to take into consideration when they set their goals. We have always operated on these kinds of general principles, and some of them wax and wane depending on what we're looking at. So is it a SMART goal? Is it specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound? Another question is, will it meet AYP proficiency targets? Because although some of the financial sanctions have gone away, the results are still reported publicly. So you will see when you've not met a goal, it will say below goal or did not meet goal. Will it generate enough MMR points for us to continue to make progress on reducing the gap and showing growth? And will it align with the district's strategic objective of every student meeting or exceeding rigorous standards without demographic predictability? So, these are all the things that weigh down on how do we set a goal that we can work with.
So the goals for all of the elementary schools are the same, except for the schools where some groups have already met that goal, in which case it's been raised.
Yeah, that's right. For our 4 elementaries, it's the same. It's based on grades 3 through 5. And the reality is, I could say, let's say the goal is 70, let's say the results are at 50%. We can say we're going to aim for 70%. We can say we're going to aim for 60%. If we focus on proficiency, we have a good chance that students who does not meet might get to partially meets. So, but they will generate points, is what I'm trying to say. They will generate points for the school to be able to make AYP targets. I can come back to this and get your input, get through with the graduation data slides, or how would you like to do it?
As we've talked in the past, I'd really like to see the individual student have growth rates, and then have a realistic growth rate for each of the individual students, and then roll that back into a number. I know that doesn't answer your question, because you need a projection. And that projection would be what the state would want, plus or minus, or plus a factor, so that we can so we have a realistic goal. So that's what I think. I still think it's to the individuals, and then help those individuals make that goal.
And with respect to the student growth estimates, they are generated after testing is over, because as you can imagine, they're going to look at same thing. If I had 355 as a 3rd grader in reading, and I take my 4th grade test, they're going to look at where did all the 355s end up. And that's where they're going to get the growth projection from. So it'll happen after the fact. and it will vary from year to year.
Well, I guess we can say, in fact, we can start, none of us really liked what it was, that we just took, you know, the 12 years and said, well, we need to make this much. And so we're going to put our rate here, which, so we could get to 100% by 2014. So it's the way to start then, is we don't like that one. And looking at your kind of points, they're kind of related. I mean, I think we want SMART goals. I mean, you know, measurable and realistic, time-bound. I mean, that is something that I think we're striving for. And, you know, obviously we want to align with our strategic objectives. So, I mean, I think it's a mixture here. And maybe we just need to refine that a little bit with some recommendations of how the principals would see doing that and what would seem realistic and how they calculate it. I mean, in the abstract, I think what you've listed here are all the relevant considerations. And maybe there's some others we haven't thought about. So, I mean, I think we're in need of maybe a little direction in terms of what makes sense. I mean, I think we could tell you strategically, you know, we're looking at, as our plan says, you know, we don't want demographically predictable results, and to do that, we're going to have to reduce the gap, and it's not going to happen overnight, and we're going to put strategies in place. But how that measures out to each school, what's a realistic percent of growth in math? I mean, I think maybe we need a little more. I don't know what other people say.
And of what I'm sorting out and hearing here, I like what Ken has suggested on the individual goals, and I think that's what I hear happens in the schools, maybe not setting the goals yet quite as precisely, and that may still be something to aspire to, but I think I understand that setting, in some way we have to translate that to a building goal, and it's not just an average or some calculation of those individual goals. We're really measuring things somewhat differently for the building goals. And I was surprised, but I think I like the idea of having the same goal for all of the buildings, in that we ought to be reaching similar results. That's one of the things we've aspired to with IB and the primary years program, is that it doesn't matter who your child is and which building they're in. We want them all to end up at the same place. So I like that, even though that creates reach goals, stretch goals, whatever you want to say, for some categories. But I also want to make sure we're pushing our schools that have been successful with some groups sufficiently hard as well. And I think I've been trained well enough by you, Prachi, to know we don't have enough years of data here to be really sure. Like the data we saw tonight with Susan Lingard with the Latino students, astronomical changes, and as you know, due in part to the great work of the staff there, and in part, as the principal acknowledged, because you had a slightly different mix of kids as kids aged out and moved on from there. So school 2 at 58 might be at 73 next year. You know, I don't know. There can be significant variations, but I want to make sure we're pushing hard enough in schools with groups of kids that are already doing fairly well. That's not an answer to your question, but those are the thoughts and the things that I think are important based on what I'm hearing here tonight.
Well, and I'm just wondering, how did you pick 2 or 5% on the schools that are already meeting it? I mean,
yeah, the reason for that was that with respect to ATPPS goals, schools are required to pick a goal that's 2% higher than last year, which is out of sync with what AYP is telling us to do, but ATPPS. It's good to know we're not the only ones who sometimes operate in silos. So And, you know, the backdrop to all of this, I think, is framed by our district's strategic objective. We're doing a lot in education. We're going places that we haven't gone before. So, you know, we used to be in the realm of criterion-based norm reference testing, and now we're based on criterion-based testing. So it means that every student is going to attain mastery or proficiency, and it's not going to be that 33% are never going to be at the average score. So it's a new frontier in many ways, where we are beginning to learn how to teach differently so all students can achieve.
But don't we still have some norm reference? The MCA test, what is proficient, varies from year to year, correct?
It doesn't vary from year to year, because they've set the cut point at which proficiency happens, so that's 350. Yeah, so every year. The only time it's reset is when there's a new iteration, like we'll have MCA 3 reading next year to align with the current language arts standards.
Because it used to vary from year to year where they would set the cutoff point, but now we've cleaned that up.
Okay, I'll answer it because it's going to open another box. It doesn't change, but what happens is that there wasn't an agreement, or there wasn't a process by which different grade levels came together to decide, are our cut points comparable? As in, is it easier to be proficient in 3rd grade compared to 6th grade? That didn't happen. And we are used to, again, traditionally, we're used to looking at the same student and looking at how they're growing. Whereas, as you were saying, Julie, we are saying it shouldn't matter if we have rigorous standards, if we have high expectations, if we have good teaching, then which school a student is going to or which section a student is in shouldn't have such a huge impact on what results they get.
So is it problematic to set benchmarks to say that growth will be statistically significant, like it will be, you can measure that it had gone up? And also, is it problematic to say that our benchmark could be after 1 year of school, additional school, that student will be at least one, for lack of a better term, 1 year better, or at least 1 year more proficient, I guess.
At least a year's growth.
At least a year's growth, yeah.
Yeah. No, it's not problematic at all. In fact, the growth targets that are set right now, again, are not extremely steep. It's half a standard deviation, whereas typically in research, it's a 1 standard deviation that's considered an improvement. So we get back data on each of our students, which says whether they made low, medium, or high growth. And low is lower than, again, compared to their expected low, medium, high, based on that. And 1 year's growth right now, Joe, given that there isn't that vertical alignment from grade level to grade level, how we look at it is, if you were proficient in this grade level, then you should remain proficient in the next grade level. That's how we have looked at it.
And do you find, in terms of the shape of the curve, is it a normal distribution?
No,
or is it? Okay,
it's not.
So what happens?
It depends on the grade level you're looking at. So, for example, don't hold me to this, but for example, 350, that cut score is at about a 32nd percentile. So it's positively skewed. And the cut points, again, it's based on how the students performed, or the cut score was set, and when they looked at the data, they saw that more or close to 70% of the students were proficient using that cut score.
Prachi, just a few comments. First, when do you set the goal for next year?
We do that at the data retreat, which has traditionally been at the beginning of the year in August. And by that, we schedule it so that all the data is back from reading and math, so people can look at their goals and their results, and then set the goal for next year.
And the reason I ask that is because the end point in my listening and thinking here is it would be wonderful to get input from our educational leaders, including our new superintendent, and then maybe revisit this among the board before or after the August retreat, depending on what makes sense as the time frame plays itself out. So I'll just throw that out for starters. Okay. I always like our district to do better than the state averages. However that fits into the goals, just factor that in. I kind of have mixed feelings on Julie's comment that I like the buildings to all have the same goal and a reach goal, but at the same time, I like realistic goals. I mean, so that the staff that's working so hard feels that they're attainable. And for some buildings, when, you know, like by your example, that, you know, you got to close the gap, but you got to do something that is attainable so you feel good about your efforts. And so that is a variable that I factor into setting goals and holding people accountable, because that's part of the process. So those are just, I think, a few of the thoughts that I had as I sat here and listened to the conversation.
Thank you. And yes, our principals wanted the board's input so that they can think about how do we set goals that push us, like you said, help us align with the district strategic objective.
Any other comments before you go? Larry, is the kibitzing over there yet, or are you?
We're working out some high-level math over here. So.
Yeah.
Okay. They got it figured out.
The math whizzes at this end will come back at you.
We'll invite you to the data retreat maybe, and you can hold some sessions.
Yeah, with the idea of aligning with the district strategic objective, and it's been mentioned a couple of times here, that is obviously what we want on the board. And that says all students will achieve. And then it says without demographically predictable results. We've continued to see some demographically predictable results. But we see pockets of excitement. I mean, some people hitting it big and making really great gains, and that's what we need to see. I want to echo Nancy a little bit. I guess I'm just uncomfortable with the schools all having the same goal, especially when a teacher reaches the end of the year and says, gee, the end discussion is we didn't make the goal. I mean, somebody will stand up there and say that, and yet if that 58% went to 71, they still say I didn't make the goal, but that's huge progress. And so I'm uncomfortable with that. I don't know how we work through that, but in our discussions that we've had before, and that I'm also echoing Ken, I mean, I want to see individual progress throughout the year. I don't know whether that 50% is smart or not. We know it's arbitrary, but at the same time, we want to see that kind of progress happening. And so aligning our schools and aligning the board, the superintendent, the principals, and the teachers to get there, that's what I think what you're hearing tonight. Okay.
Well,
go ahead.
Just to piggyback on that, I mean, I think we've got some work to do, and we can work with the new superintendent on how we want to go with this. I mean, we could break it down in the interim before we get to maybe the individual student level and just say subgroups within, I mean, we do this to some extent already, but subgroups within schools showing growth, and we'll determine what that growth is, and generate a scorecard based on that. But I think, yeah, we've got some more discussion to do.
And of course, we depend on you, Prachi, to give us the feedback that says how do we do that.
And you cannot meet all of them. Like Nancy was saying, that we like to be above the state. So in some cases, it's going to look like that. It's going to be 73% with the school sitting at 58%.
I think while we want to have input and have some ideas on it, I'm not sure that it's necessarily our call. I mean, we got to be careful about our role here. I mean, we can give input, whatever, but we want to hear what the goals are and why. I mean, if we're at the policy level, strategic plan, let's go back to that and how we create our own scorecard and how we measure. And while we're interested in the data, the statistics, and are willing to give input, we got to figure out where that line is. What's our role? What's that role? So.
Yes, I don't think any one person has the answer. So we are going to go back and discuss with principals and the data retreat teams. Shall we move on to graduation rate?
Prachi, just one more comment that I meant to say and forgot is, on occasion here, I've heard us say, what about two goals for a building? The high goal and then the achievable goal. I don't know if that makes any sense or not, but I want to throw that out as something to noodle on.
Although the AYP goal appears to be that.
Yeah.
Yes.
And,
yeah.
You know, maybe we need to view them that way. I'm increasingly fond of the stretch goal, but because I want us to get there, and that's what our strategy is. But again, I think our job is to say the line that Bruce read from the strategic plan. That's what we've said. It's our district leadership that can decide what's the best way to get us there.
And that's why in every school report you will hear a reference to AYP goals. How did we do with respect to that? So hopefully people don't stop listening after they hear that we didn't meet our proficiency goal, but we met our AYP targets. So. That's a good thing. Yes. So what's new with graduation rates is that starting in 2012, we have a universal graduation rate calculation formula, if you will. Now, although it says 2012, remember that graduation rate and attendance rates always are a year behind. So they refer to 2011 rates, but they're reported as 2012 graduation rates. These were released, the 2012 graduation rates were released in February, and they're going to be part of the 2013 AYP and MMR reports that are going to be released sometime in September.
So just to jump in so I'm straight. So the 2012 grad rates that were released in 2013 had to do with the kids who were supposedly graduating in 2011?
That's a good summary.
Okay.
And also new is that the target used to be 85%, I think. I'm glad you're here, Rob. The target is 90%, but if you don't meet target, you can also meet target by showing improvement. And there are different improvement numbers based on whether you're looking at the 4-year rate, the 5-year rate, or the 6-year rate. That too is new, that there'll be 3 graduation rates calculated, and this is to take into account that not every student graduates in 4 years for a variety of reasons. So previously they just were not counted at all, and now they can be counted. This is a simplistic diagram of how graduation rate is calculated. The numerator is a count of on-time graduates in year 4. So they go back 4 years, look at who was entering in 9th grade 4 years ago, look at how many are have the status of graduate. That's the numerator. And the denominator is the first time entering 9th graders, plus any transfers in and minus any transfers out.
And we should clarify, a transfer is defined as a student who ends up at another school, and we know he or she ends up at that school probably because they asked us for the records. Right?
Yes, and sometimes they are, they do tell us they're going. And so we can actually say that they transferred out or they went to this school, or if they go out of state. The moment they are unenrolled, then it's a transfer out.
Yeah, I think I'm a step ahead of you. I'm getting into sorting out the continuing dropouts.
I know you had a lot of detailed questions last time. I've
forgotten all those questions, but I
have that data from MDE, Julie, so if you want it, I can give it to you. So again, this has a little more detail. What's not included in the calculation: transferred to a non-approved, non-public school, moved outside of state or country, died, or incarcerated. So we have some fantastic news with respect to the 2011 and 2012 four-year grad rates. The first couple of bars, the blue ones, have to do with all students. And again, in graduation rate calculations, no, it would have been worse if it came during that goal-setting time. You have to have 40 students in order to have grad rates calculated. So the first pair of bars, blue bars, 73% to 85%, our four-year graduation rate for all students increased. Then the next one is for our black students. It went from 54% to 80%. And this was the largest increase in the state, and also the largest rate, graduation rate in the state. So it was 27% points increase for our high school. And the second highest was Wayzata at 15%, so a significant gap. The high school also had the second highest graduation rate for free and reduced lunch students, which is that 48 and 69, the fourth pair from the left. In 2012, 70% of our English learners graduated. We don't have a comparison point because we had less than 40 students in 2011. So that is my last slide. You have an additional page that shows you numbers of students by each group. So you have a reference point of how big is it that we're talking about.
And in those where it says 0%, it's because the total number of students was less than 40.
Which one are you looking at, Julie?
The 2011-12 grad rates, the one that you don't have the slide on?
Yeah, the 0% is because there were 0 graduates. There were total American Indian students. There were 2 students, but nobody graduated.
Other questions?
No. It was just, it's amazingly nice to see that, let's say, the 80% of the black population is graduating, but we're still seeing 54% not passing these standardized tests. So it's just.
Thank you, Craig.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is the policy development. Dr. Bowers will talk to that real quickly.
Corey presented us a PowerPoint to you last time, and it had some revisions for accountability that Bruce had asked to be put in there. He also double-checked with other districts of what they were doing and vetted it, and so it is up for a second reading.
Any questions on that? Thank you. Next item on the agenda, QComp at the high school discussion, and it'll be led by Rob Metz and his team.
Good evening, Dr. Bowers and board members. I'm here with a variety of staff members from the high school. I'm going to begin by introducing them. I have Mark Miller beside me. He is a science teacher, department head, and for the purposes of tonight, he is our lead bill. I'm going to define that in a minute. Erica Merrick, who has a variety of roles here at the high school, English teacher by trade. Carrie Schwiedering, who's our director of students, and Lauren Buxton, who's a special education teacher here, but also is our professional learning leader at the high school. I'm going to, before we begin our presentation, define some terms that you're going to need to know. This is very educational language here, very hard to understand. So I'm going to go through some of these terms and at the beginning, and then that may clarify some things. You're going to hear a couple of terms that we're going to use synonymously. One is QComp, which really stands for, I better get my glasses here. Quality compensation, QComp. Synonymous with that is ATPPS, which is the Alternative Teacher Performance Pay System. So we use those two things back and forth depending on what slide you look at. Another acronym you're going to hear is PDP, which is a Professional Development Plan. Right now, each teacher sets their own individual professional development plan. The term BIL, which I use describing Mark, is a building instructional leader. Think of those as master teachers. We have a variety of master teachers here at the high school. Every single teacher at the high school and every single teacher in St. Louis Park is observed 3 times each year by a BIL, or a master teacher. PLC is a professional learning community. So this is when teachers gather in a group and talk about their professional learning and strategies they can use to help students improve. Professional learning and professional development, those two both talk about the same thing. Whenever we have an early release or a late start date, our professional learning teams are developing professional development activities for our teachers to take part in. And then the last one is PAT, the Park Association of Teachers. So lots of acronyms. They all have a role. And part of what we're going to talk about is how to blend all of these things together for a common purpose. So with that, I'm going to begin by saying we are here to request your approval to change the QComp system here at the high school. QComp is a state-approved alternative teacher performance pay system. That's where ATPPS comes from. Currently, QComp provides teachers an opportunity to earn up to $2,000 in additional pay each year for participating in the system and achieving a variety of individual and group goals. So if they participate and if they achieve their individual and group goals, teachers in St. Louis Park can earn up to $2,000 additional pay each year. We're going to propose a new system other than the one we're currently using. And we believe the new system we are presenting tonight will better support classroom teachers as they work to change the way they teach to better meet the needs of all students. We also believe the new system will help the high school staff better align their teaching strategies with the school's goals, the new teacher evaluation system, and the new principal evaluation system. So first we're going to begin by showing you the current QComp system, and then we're going to explain the changes.
So I'm going to give you a brief history of ATPPS, just in case. So if you have questions, feel free to just jump right in. So when we originally started this process back in 2005, a committee came together of teachers and put together the outline that you're going to kind of see presented here today. And we're going to kind of keep it short because we're more excited about the new system that we've come up with. So general membership voted, and overwhelmingly, every time we vote for this, a high percentage of staff members vote yes because it is well received at the high school. Process requirements include really 4 things. There's observations. Like Rob said, every teacher, every PAT member gets observed 3 times. They create a PDP, which is hopefully a SMART goal. We also write a building goal at the data retreat. And then most of it is then focused on student achievement. So some form of student achievement goal is reached hopefully at the end of the year. The original objective was to increase the capacity of teacher leaders. It was also to streamline the professional development process. Instead of being pulled 50 different directions, hopefully we can create one team that does that. Didn't necessarily work, but that was one of the objectives. To improve instruction through peer observation. There has been some positive growth here, but the new plan we believe will push us a little bit more in that direction. To organize PLC activities at sites, which has been definitely a huge improvement. We didn't have PLCs here for the longest time, and we now have those operational. And it also helped let's see if I can read here, to help staff identify and write a goal linked to student achievement. The current system at the high school, has 2 lead bills, myself and Jenny Magdahl, and then there's 18 bills that work underneath us, and they are master teachers. They're trained in the Charlotte Danielson framework so that there's a consistency in each classroom. There are also mentors and observers who are also all trained in the same model so that we try to be consistent. I wrote down in the presentation what it looks like at the elementary school and the middle school, but at the high school there's a total of 20 people who are really truly involved in this process. And that number continues to kind of dwindle as we continue this process. So
is it because lack of interest or
that, and it's a huge time commitment, and it's become one more thing to do. So it's hard to get people to do it. So currently at the high school, we have tons of initiatives. And this isn't a complete list, but this is here's 4 things that were pulled in many different directions. QComp pulls us one way, PLCs pull us another. We have professional learning, and then we also have I3. And those are just kind of the big 4. There's multiple other aspects that are pulling us as well.
So just a little bit of history. This year when we started, we had 2 groups. We had an equity team and we had professional learning. And one of the things we decided to do at the beginning of this year is to blend those 2 groups. And I think that was a really good decision that we made. And what has happened in the past is that professional learning hasn't necessarily been focused in any one particular area. People would come and kind of ask for time or ask for topics. And so what we did this year is really focused our attention on equity. And I think Dr. Harley was mentioned earlier. He's been here several times this year talking about instructional strategies. So the staff here, I think, really does recognize there needs to be some change. And we really do believe that teachers, really helping teachers, is really the best strategy in order to do this. And the methods that we are wanting to implement are really equity focused. So we want to create a meaningful system that helps staff instruction. And the current system is observation-based. It's not coaching-based. And one of the things that we've been working on already this year, we have a consultant coming in who is expert in this coaching model. His name is Jamie Almazan. And so he's been working with our staff to do this. And so we do believe that shifting from that observation to coaching model is really going to help improve classroom instruction and ultimately reduce the achievement gap. We also are looking to have staff have the time to do this, and we've been talking about a variety of ways to do this, to have time with staff. How it will probably change, it will not be department-based or curriculum-based. It's going to be common time-based. So teachers in the math department will be interacting with teachers in the English department. Again, I think this is also a positive change.
So what it could look like, we would like to modify the current system of 18 to 20 bills and replace them with 2 full-time equity coaches or equity coaching positions. These coaches would be responsible for coaching teachers, and that would be individual coaching as well as helping with PLCs and professional development. QComp, we'd still have the same 4 components: the PDP, the site goal, the observations, and the student achievement. PLCs, they'd be teams of teachers working towards better instruction during the day. So we're trying to make it work where teachers have common time to meet during the day, so it's not an add-on. And then also teacher evaluation, it's coming, as we all know, and so the coaches would do the 2 peer evaluations, and then the principal do the summative.
So with these 2 full-time equity coaches, would they be new hires or existing staff, or how would that look? What would that look like? And then would the money come from? Would it come from QComp?
They would more than likely come from the the existing staff. We have provided some training already when Jamie Amazon was here, just to give people an idea of what this would be like to be a coach. He's coming back next week to meet with our whole staff and dig a little deeper into this. But already we've asked for volunteers who'd like to learn more and be considered. And I think the list is up to 15 different teachers here who have shown interest or been nominated by their peers as potential equity coaches.
And then the dollars, are these QComp dollars? Do we have access, as long as there's buy-in from both the teachers and the district, then the funding can come from the QComp dollars?
Yes, the funding would come from QComp, and you're going to see a slide in just a minute that will explain that.
All staff would have the same PDP goal. So instead of having individual goals, we'd have one goal that's aligned that everyone can be working towards, with the hopes that people could share different strategies that are working and collaborate more. And if one teacher's excelling somewhere, then other people can work together to hear more about that and hopefully implement the same things. We'd focus on improving student achievement using specific strategies that are equity focused, such as those offered by Dr. Holly. And meetings would become coaching sessions, and discussions will focus on what worked and what did not. Teams could look at data and talk about what they see. Coaches will help coordinate data. So it'll be much more of a coaching versus an observation.
This is difficult to see, so I apologize for that, but it's a visual that kind of helped us when we presented it to our staff of what we've been working on and what kind of things would be coming up. So if you look at the left-hand side, the idea with that is really aligning everything so that there was purpose and we were all working to the same vision, the same goal. So if a principal was going to be evaluated on the fact that he closed or he or she closed the achievement gap in their building, that would only happen if the teachers were working to close the achievement gap in their classrooms. So if we're all working to the same kind of goal, ultimate goal, we're going to have the same alignment, we're going to have the same kind of focus and be able to move and help each other to support each other going that way. The middle part talks a little bit, Jim, about your question in the proposal. Right now we're fully funded through QComp dollars. It's not coming out of other pots. But what we had to do at the high school to be able to afford going from a stipend based for 18 to 20 people, moving to 2 full-time positions, we would have to go from, Mr. Metz mentioned earlier that they get about $2,000 is what an individual teacher or PAT member could get. What we had to do is say that we're going to take less, so, which was a risk to say that, you know, we're saying as a high school, and this is high school only, that we were willing to reallocate our funds. We don't lose the money, but what we were asking for was that individual PAT members, rather than having the money that you could get would be $2,000. Now the extent of what you could get would be $1,500. So that extra $500 would be reallocated to be able to fund the 2 full-time positions. And like I said, that was a risk because we're asking for a good chunk of people, everybody, to be on board to say that now you potentially would not be getting that extra money. But I think that says a lot, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But so we kind of went through that, had to rewrite it. The very last column gave us kind of a timeline, basically. This did come up pretty quickly. Our vision about equity has been ongoing, but really this has been within the last month of putting kind of our pieces together to make things happen. And part of the rush around it was state deadlines, but also the urgency that we have in our schools. We need to do something, and we felt really strongly that at the high school and through our district, we've done amazing things, and let's not wait. We're going to do it now. So I am encouraged by the votes that we've already had so far. So one is the lead bills. We presented to them and gave them information. We presented to the staff at the high school and gave them information. The high school then had to do a vote, and that was based on the idea of, we wanted to know what our high school staff felt. Were they in support of this or not? And as you can see there, they did vote 83% in favor, which was way more than we thought, than we actually needed. We didn't need a vote of yes or no, but obviously is helpful. And so that is just really commendable for our staff to say that this is important for our entire building. The first bullet there was the team, or I'm sorry, I'm going to go back, sorry, to this other slide, because that's what I was working from, is that after the high school did, then we went to the lead bills, and they had to vote to say that they were in approval of this, which they were. The meet and confer took that, then we're coming to you, and then the last thing will be the state has to approve it. So that will be submitted to state approval on the 15th, assuming that it is approved here. So that's kind of our last step as we go through. I already mentioned the first one was that it really was an effort. This came out of teachers basically saying we know we can do better, we just need a different system to be able to support us to do that. And then the amount of people that came on board, different elementary staff, our PAT leadership came to different meetings and really supported us, and we really appreciate that. And then the last part, again, I already said, but that was the idea that, I mean, we are doing more with less, and yet just differently, I guess. We're doing it with different, and we're really excited about it. So that is that.
So a couple of things just in a nutshell, and then we'll take questions, and then I also want to introduce Kevin Jones, is really we're trying to get at the meat of the issue, which is what happens in the classroom between the teacher and the students, and where the instruction is really going to be changed so that all students can achieve, and believing that the equity coaching model is the way to accomplish that. Also aligning all of our internal systems toward a common goal is a second piece of this. So really I want to thank the people behind me. It's not very often that the professional development leader of the building, the lead bill in the building, our HR director, Kimberly, our superintendent, Tammy over there in special education, who was a part of this, and really the teachers union, represented by Kevin here, all came together and agreed on what needed to happen, and we made it happen. So we're anxious to give it a try, and we're asking for your support, and you may have questions for us.
It sounds like observation's still going to be part of the plan, and we're taking 18 to 20 bills and replacing them with 2 equity coaches. Are they going to be able to observe as much as whatever they're going to need to observe?
They will. The goal is about 40 people each, so 3 observations for 40 different people. That's 120 observations in 180 some days of school. There's a lot more to the job than that, but they should be able to do it.
Is this a Jamie Almanzon who used to train Beyond Diversity? Okay, I took that Beyond Diversity with him, and I was impressed. So I think that's good to know. Which method is going to do a better job of finding that brilliant thing that Mark does in his classroom and sharing that with Erica and, doing that kind of thing?
Yeah. I'm thinking of a variety of ways, and this group may want to jump in, but one thing that the coaches can do is they're going to see a lot of good things going on, and they're going to learn a lot from Jamie to pass on to classroom teachers. When they see one teacher doing something well, they can sub for another teacher, and that teacher can go in and watch that first teacher doing something well. So that's one piece of flexibility we're really excited about. The second thing that I'm excited about is it's going to change the way we organize our PLCs. That was mentioned in this process. Right now, our PLCs are organized around a common subject area, and in the future, they'd be organized around a time when teachers can meet during the day. That will mean that the groups will be multi-departmental. So it'll be a science teacher, an English teacher, a social studies teacher, a math teacher, all meeting, and they're going to be talking about strategies that work for them to close the gap. So sharing good ideas among their PLC and sharing strategies with one another. Does anyone want to add to that?
I think our goal too with the coaching positions is that they would be leaders in the professional learning as well, so they could take some of those ideas and share to the staff and highlight different educators and maybe mentor certain teachers as well and partner people up. So.
Okay, that makes sense to me then, because I think the value in QComp, to me, it was nice to be able to find a way to have more funds available for teachers, but the value I had hoped for was more chances to find out what great things are happening in other classrooms, to go watch other teachers and to get that cross-fertilization. And it sounds like that's exactly what you think is going to happen more often.
Because currently, I think it's pretty obvious if you go to a bill meeting, those 18 bills who are going to those classrooms and observing those people, 3 times a year, are really getting the majority of the benefit. They're seeing the different strategies, they're seeing what works, they take it back to their classroom, they do it, and they're like, oh my gosh, that was awesome. And then you go to have that conversation with that teacher. And you can, I brought these, I've got plenty of copies for you, just so you kind of have a feel for what those bills are doing when they're in the classroom. You can take a copy of this. But you sit and basically, as a bill, you want to coach them, but it's more secondary than just going through a checklist of did you get a P or did you get a B? And as a teacher, I'm looking to get Ps. I'm not necessarily looking at what strategies can I get from this person who's coming in. It's, did I get my Ps? Sweet, I got my Ps, I've got 11 more, and then I get $2,000. And that's a little bit of sarcasm there, because there's definitely some great things that have happened here, but unfortunately it has become a checklist. And with the new system, we really want to collaborate with other groups to what worked, what didn't work, to have that real time to discuss that versus just Ps and Bs.
Well, then kudos for taking the initiative as a staff to find a better way to do this.
Thank you. Any?
One obvious measure is, have you closed the gap? Are there other measures to know in a year whether this is working, or is that just the ultimate measure?
And actually, that's a good question, because what does that mean? And and it's hard to look at that to say, right now we have a math goal in our building, and if I don't teach math, I might check out of that. That's the math department to make sure that they do that, and how does that impact me? So what our plan is, as we move to a building-wide professional development plan, that the idea could be failure rates of our Black and brown students. So that, regardless if I teach math, regardless if I teach art, that is consistent. And then having strategies behind it. So if I'm a counselor or a media specialist, that if I'm walking around my media center, I would go and make sure I'm interacting with a Black or brown student, 1/10 of the time or 1/2 of the time, or whatever the goal might be individually. So it makes it meaningful for each of us, and then being able to do that, we believe, will truly close the gap.
Well, good. So the goals are, how the measurements are still to come. Then I hear you got a couple ideas. It sounds like, and
yeah, we do.
And then the other thought, and I don't know how this fits in or whatever, but and I think it's a great idea. I mean, you're going to have master teachers then actually communicating and sharing strategies, but you're taking 2 master teachers out of the classroom that are impacting kids, and I don't know how you address that other than you think you got a greater good of having teachers teach the teachers.
Exactly. Yeah, we've talked about that quite a bit. We do have, as I said, about 15 people that have shown some interest, and I don't think we're looking at this as a long-term position, but more someone will come out of the classroom and serve in this role for a year or maybe 2 and then go back into the classroom. Trying to grow and develop new leaders is also a good thing. The times that we've removed people from the classroom for a short time has given someone else a chance to grow and develop into a leader, and then we bring them back in the classroom again.
And you know what, that sounds good, because it changes their job for a couple of years, maybe, and inspires them. So I think that I could see how that'd be a benefit then.
We want to thank you. Really, we want to thank all of you. To make sure, though, that when I heard what you were doing with the bills, teachers teaching teachers, to me that's, I mean, and because it fit in with everything else we were doing with the PLCs, I was just excited about that, and I know we've made progress. I mean, Rob, we saw that with you and your team and your graduation rate. It's incredible. But now I hear teachers teaching teachers, coached by master teachers on equity. Seems like really the right thing to do. I mean, it seems incredible. I mean, you know, why didn't we think of this before? But it doesn't matter. What matters is you've thought of it, you've gotten everybody onto the team, and it just sounds fantastic. So
I think it's, you know, we just came to the joint conclusion that for us to really take the next step, we really need our best teacher in there coaching the next teacher on how to teach in a culturally competent way, how to close this gap. And we all came to the same conclusion at the same time, that it has to happen in the room when the students are there, helping each other do it. So it was great. Kevin Jones is here because to make this happen, we have to submit a plan change to the state of Minnesota that's due Wednesday. And Kevin is the Park Association of Teacher representative that's been helping us all the way along. So he's going to finish up.
Good evening, Dr. Bowers, school board members. I'm Kevin Jones, Park Association of Teachers president. How do you argue with that kind of energy and that thinking outside the box and, you know, the risk taking and all the things that we ask of our children, and now our staff is taking the lead and giving their best effort to do what's best for children. I'm here to present the QCOM plan changes proposed for 2013-2014. The team behind me went over most of those, beginning with number 1. There will be a 2-track system. The high school will do its equity model pilot program. The rest of the district will continue to do QComp as it has been in the past. Now, that's not to say that those buildings won't have an opportunity to take bits and pieces of this model and try it out in their own buildings, but at this point in time, we'll leave that up to those buildings. The second change was the individual or the single PDP for the building. All the other sites will continue to do individual PDPs at their building. The third change being the 2 coaching positions. So we'll have a reduction of bills at the high school level. They'll be wanting to do their 2 coaches. The rest of the district will continue to have 6 to 7 bills, I believe, at each of their sites. The fourth change is that the senior high has agreed to reduce their stipend from $2,000 to $1,500 based on a full-time tenured teacher. The rest of the district will continue to receive the $2,000 stipend, of course, if they meet all of the criteria. Another change will be the reduction of the QCOM coordinator from a 1.0 FTE to a 0.4. And I believe those are the changes. In addition, the current MOU that guides ATPPS will sunset on June 30th. We have a new MOU in place that has already been signed by PAT leadership, and that will be set to go on July 1st. So those are the changes we have. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to do my best to answer those, or I will default to the team behind me to answer those questions.
Everybody's great with it, Kevin. Thank you. Lauren, Carrie, Erica, Mark, and Rob, thank you all. This is incredible, and we really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate you waiting through a long meeting, too.
Yeah. We now turn to our action items on the agenda. The first one of those is on the rewritten sheet that everyone has. It's for approval and review and comment for deferred maintenance and building addition projects, bond referendum preparation, and capital projects levy preparation. It is recommended that the school board directs the superintendent to prepare and submit a letter and additional required documentation to the Commissioner of Education for the financing of the capital projects levy, better known as the technology levy, deferred maintenance and building addition projects in accordance with Minnesota Statute Section 123B.71. The school board approves the funding deferred maintenance project and building addition projects with a bond referendum. Therefore, the board directs the superintendent to prepare for a bond referendum. Also, the board directs the superintendent to prepare for a capital projects levy to replace the technology levy that will expire in 2014. Motion? So moved by
Second.
Larry.
Second.
Second by Jim. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. We have a 7-0 vote. Next item for approval is the tentative contract. Director of Research and Assessment. It is recommended the school board approve the employment contract between Independent School District 283 and the Director of Research and Assessment for the 2011-2012 and 2012-2013 school years as presented. Kimberly?
Members of the board, in negotiating this contract, we followed and met the parameters as described by the board for this process, and I am happy to let you know that we are doing our best to eliminate any tails, and I think we've got a good process going.
Nancy?
And I just want to be clear that we're all on the same page. For the sick leave provision, that is only used for being sick. You don't get a payout once you terminate. It's just if you're sick.
Correct.
Bruce? Larry?
I also just want to make sure we're doing this contract basically in arrears.
That is correct. When I arrived to the district, there were several contracts that were past their term. Thank you for the words. Been a long day. Anyway, so I've been doing my best to get caught up. It will be my intention moving forward that we don't get to a point where we're so far behind on a contract. I don't believe that it's very respectful to the employee, and we just need to get moving on things faster.
Okay, thanks.
Motion? As read, I read the motion. I need a, did I get a first and a second? Jim? Oh, right. I'm sorry. No. That was the last one. No, I need a motion to approve. Okay. Moved by Joe, second by Ken. Thank you. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. 7-0 vote. Approval of the second reading of Policy 650, Student Fundraising, Attachment H. It is recommended the school board approve the second reading of Policy 650, Student Fundraising, as presented. Motion? Moved by Larry, second? Second. Second by Julie. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. 7-0 vote. Last item. Approval of the QComp plan change. It is recommended the school board approve the proposed plan design change for the quality compensation plan. The plan change includes a reduction of the coordination position from 1.0 FTE to a 0.4 FTE. The introduction of a pilot program at the high school only, which replaces the bills with 2 full-time equity coaches. C, with the decrease of the performance award for the pilot program only from $2,000 to $1,500 annually. This is a 1-year agreement for the 2013-2014 contract year. Motion? Motion. Motion by Ken. Second? Second. Second by Julie. Any discussion?
It's awesome.
It is. Great plan. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Okay, we have a 7-0 vote. Communications and transmittals.
Yeah, I want to let everybody know that there will be a retirement reception for the St. Louis Park Superintendent, Dr. Deborah Bowers. We are really pleased that this has been organized, and it will be happening on Thursday, May 23rd at the Doubletree in Minneapolis Park Place. Doubletree is down near the West End, and it's May 23rd, a Thursday from 3 to 6 p.m. Deborah, Dr. Bowers has done a great job for us, and I'm going to be sad to see you go and delighted to celebrate all that you've given to us.
Anyone else?
I'll take one, unless you're going to do it. There's a play for the junior high. I know you'd rather do those, but my daughter's in this one. So there's a play on the junior high. It is on this weekend, and they are doing Mermaid. No, in the sea. Little Mermaid, yes, Little Mermaid. So, okay. And it's, I stopped down there before the meeting, and it looks to be very exciting. So, a lot of kids out there. And that's this weekend. I do believe it's Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and the times are posted in the junior high.
Joe?
I was thinking about this right as I saw Tammy mouth it. Children first, ice cream social. Okay, so my lip reading is good enough here. Sunday, May 19th. Is it 2 o'clock?
2 o'clock.
2 o'clock.
And the first shift, scooping ice cream.
And the specialty flavor is putting children first.
Any other communications and transmittals? Okay, I have one. The board has had a busy week. We appreciate all the hard work that everyone has put in, especially the work of the staff. Excellent support for the board in finding a new superintendent. The board had a tremendous opportunity to talk to the equivalent of 7 PhDs in education the week before, of working with the final 3 this week, and now we'll be moving ahead with a contract for our new superintendent. We are scheduled currently to approve the new contract for Mr. Metz on 5/28. There's been a committee of the board meeting. We've had meetings with our team in the administration to get the board the contract set for the new superintendent, and we are proposing a special meeting of the board on the Tuesday, the 21st at 5:30. And we've got to work with the board members to make sure that we can put a quorum together for that. But that'll be a special meeting specifically to discuss the new contract, that the pieces of it look like what the board wants. So before we get to the 28th, we'll have a meeting on the 21st. Any other communications and transmittals? At this time, then, we will entertain a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Joe. Second? Second. Second by Ken. All those in favor signify by saying aye. 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 We are adjourned. Thank you all.